There you go. Yeah, you can see the whole board. That's good to go.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning. I'm Reverend Dori, and this is our Bible study that goes with the Creation sermon series. So today I had planned to talk about Genesis, but I really feel like Genesis covers so much territory that I've decided that I'm going to split it, and we'll talk about the first part of Genesis this week and the second part of Genesis next week. And so I'm going to ask pretty please of the administration if I can have a fifth day. So we'll go, I'm hoping we'll go 5 weeks instead of 4. So one of the things that I love about doing Bible study is to share with people who are regular people in the pews, to share with them what I learned in seminary. And one of the things, if you take an Old Testament class in seminary, you get this conversation about source criticism. Now, source criticism means what are the sources that come together to form this text. And they are called J, E, P, and D. Now, J is for Yahweh. It's a J instead of a Y because in German, and these were mostly German scholars who did this work, there's not a Y in this place. The word Yahweh becomes with a J. Now, this is the way you write it in Hebrew. And one of the ways that you can know when it says Yahweh in the text is that you can see this word, Lord. It's a capital L and then 3 small capital letters. So these are half size, but they're still capitals. So when you see that in your scriptures, you know that the original text said Yahweh. There are a number of, the Yahweh comes from this time of Yahweh and Solomon, where we know that they took the oral histories and wrote them down into script form. So there's a number of things besides the use of Yahweh that this source, the J source, does. It talks about the Mount of God as being Mount Sinai. It talks about the stories, it emphasizes the stories of Abraham. And the people of the land that they're conquering are called Canaanites. Now, one of the ways that they do this source criticism is they look at things like where are there contradictions in the scriptures, where are there duplicates in the scriptures, where do they have a story that seems like it fits with this story but not with the middle story. It's sort of this weird combination. And what that means is that people, the final editors, felt like all of this scripture was really important. And so they kept stories that were contradictory or repetitive because they were all sacred scriptures. Now, the next one is that Elohim. Elohim is the word in Hebrew for God, and this comes out of the northern tribes. After Solomon, you will remember that the country split into 2 countries, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. And there are 10 tribes in the northern part. So the southern part is just Judah and Benjamin. And these two fight against each other for many, many years. The person who put together the Elohim is from the northern tribes. And it emphasizes the story of Jacob and Jacob's sons and the story of Joseph, all all those origins for those original tribes. It also it calls the mountain of God, it calls it Horeb instead of Mount Sinai. And it talks about the people of the land as being Amorites instead of Canaanites. So you can look at these things. It also has distinctive theology. The J documents are very king-oriented, leadership-oriented, where the Elohim documents are very involving the people in the whole people in the leadership. Very different ideas. Now, some people think that the Elohim documents were never actually written down, that they remained oral history. I think it was probably written at some point. The next one is the P, the priestly documents, and they come from after the exile, from when these are priests who were in exile, who worked on the whole scriptures from memory, and then also during the time of Ezra, they put together these scriptures so that to be in the final form that we have them today. Now, a couple of things that are interesting about the P documents. P loves lists, particularly lists of genealogy. So you'll be reading along, and all of a sudden there's this long list. Well, you know that you have come into a P document. Also, the P documents love rules and rituals, and anything having to do with the temple. That those all come from the P documents, including the entire book of Leviticus. And as I said, the P documents are the final editing that we now have today. The editing of the Torah is done by these priestly writers in Babylon in exile, and then later under Ezra. And the final one is D, the Deuteronomist. Remember last week I told you under King Joshua, as part of the sort of restoration of the worship of Yahweh, they cleaned up the temple and they found this scroll. And this scroll is the Deuteronomy scroll that becomes our book of Deuteronomy. We don't know whether it was written at that time, whether or not it really was an ancient scroll, or whether it had come from the northern tribes. We really don't have any idea. But the Deuteronomist scroll is the last will and testament of Moses. It's the long, long speech that he makes to tell to the people of the Hebrew people before they cross into the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. And it's also before his speech, before he goes up into the mountain and dies. So the Deuteronomist is trying to reinterpret the laws of Moses for a new generation. And that's why it's valuable for us today. So I want to look at these stories of Genesis. I tried to write, why are these stories so weird? And that's as far as I got before my pen wouldn't work. I thought we were going to have a brand new board today, but it's okay. So the Genesis covers from the creation of the world through the Hebrews being in Egypt. And that is just such a long, so many stories that, as I said, I've decided to cut it in two. So today we're going to look at these very strange origin stories. They're sagas, they're myths, they're legends, whatever you want to call them, they explain why things are as they are. And one of the things they have this continuing cycle is they say that God created humans to be God's companions, to be in touch with God. But God also created humans to have free will. And so God promises, or God covenants with humans, and then humans rebel, and they reject that covenant, and they sin, and then there's consequences of the sin, but God also shows mercy. And so you have these various stories, and the one of Adam and Eve is one of the best examples of this cycle. In that Adam and Eve, you'll remember they ate from the tree of good and evil, and then they're expelled from the garden as consequences for their sin. But there's this wonderful little story where God sits down and sews clothes for them, a sign of mercy that He helps them cover their bodies now that they understand that they're naked and are full of shame. So you have this kind of cycle that repeats itself. Then you have the story of Cain and Abel. That's a story that Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. And Cain is a farmer and brings his offering to God, and God rejects it. Abel, who is a herdsman, brings his offering to God, and God accepts it. Well, the Hebrews are herdspeople. The Canaanites are farmers. So it gives you a sense of how they thought about who God favored. And then, of course, Cain gets so mad that he kills Abel. And you have with this story, the first death, you have this story, introduction of violence into human life. But there again, the consequences of his sin is that he has to wander the world for the rest of his life. But there again, there's this little bit of mercy in that God puts a mark on Cain to show anyone that this man is under the protection of God and should not be killed. The next story is the story of the giants. It's one we almost never read. It's a story about how wickedness came into the world, and particularly about how the angels or the demons or the sons of God or whoever you want to think they are, the heavenly beings, look down and they like these human women, and so they have sex with them, and as a result of that, there are these giants who live in the world and who bring further wickedness into the world. This story is very much like many of the stories of the Middle East. There are many, many stories where gods look down and are attracted to a human woman and come down and essentially rape them. And there are these remarkable people who are born of this God-human combination. So what does God do? There's all this warping of the original creation that was created good. So God sends this huge flood. Now and we have Noah and the flood. Now there are flood stories in almost every culture. And this one is actually, that we have, is actually very, very much like one from Babylon. But flood stories are common because we know from geology that after the Ice Age, there was this rapid melting of these huge glaciers. And so there are geological evidence of huge floods really rapid waters. And so we have these traditional flood stories. And after the waters recede, Noah is promised by God that as long as there is a sun and a moon, day and night, and the seasons, that God will never again try to reset and destroy the world. So the final story is the story of Babel. It's over here. In the story of Babel, the people have multiplied greatly, and they've gotten together and they want to build this ziggurat, this really high mound of dirt that's very common in the parts of the Middle East. And they want to build it so high that they build it all the way to heaven so that they can look eye to eye with God, okay, and be equal to God. Well, God decides that this is not a good thing, and so God destroys the Tower of Babel. But in the process, God turns the people into people who can't understand each other, who have all these different languages, so that they can't get together again. And you have, as a result of that, war coming into the creation, because now you have all these different tribes, and this explains why we have war. So those are I hope that you get a chance to look at these scriptures sometime this week. That is what we're studying, and I hope that you experience this week the sense of God being in close contact with you, even when you sin, God showing mercy to you. So, thank you so much. And now I don't know how to turn it off. Does anyone know how to turn it off?